Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Winfree, and what you're about to listen to is an old episode of a podcast I used to host called Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. This particular episode originally aired April 4th, 2014, and features a discussion of Green Lantern villains. This is part two of my look through comic book villains. I had a few that I touched on earlier in the show's run, and then later on, what wound up being towards the end of its run, more or less, I did a pretty serious slog through the world of comics. And Green Lantern being a fairly prominent character across various iterations of people who have been the Green Lantern for Earth, at least, was worth a discussion, I figured. So I have a couple of guests on this one. And initially, it is myself and Sean Comer. Gavin Napier joins around the 54-minute mark, give or take. So the three of us have a pretty productive discussion. It was a good time. I hope you all enjoy the show. Pass to me. It's all you, buddy.
When the devil is too busy and dad's a bit too much, they call on me by name, you see, for my special touch. To the gentlemen, I'm misfortune. To the ladies, I'm surprise. But call me by any name, anyway, it's all the same. I'm the fly in your suit, I'm the pebble in your shoe, I'm the bee beneath your bed, I'm the bump on every head, I'm the peel on which you slip, I'm the pin in every head, I'm the thorn in your side, makes you wriggle and writhe, and it's so easy when you're evil. This is the life you see, the devil tips his hat to me, I do it all because I'm evil, and I do it all for free. Your tears are all the pay I'll ever need.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining us here on Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. Live, recorded, downloaded, however you got here, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you here. We really, really do. Because you can't be an evil overlord if you don't have minions. And whether they're Gru minions or serious minions, minions are awesome. And I can't believe I just insulted my entire listener base like that because, but hey, minions are awesome. I'm an evil minion, I'm pretty sure. All right, I am Robert Winfree. And tonight here on Everyone Loves a Bad Guy, we are still tackling comic book villains. I could go on forever with this particular genre, and I just might because, hey, why not? But we're back in the DC universe. I've kind of been alternating Marvel to DC while I've been doing this. And we're back here, and this time we're taking on the enemies of the Green Lantern Corps, the old GLC, the Guardians of the Universe, the emotional spectrum, the whole nine yards. We're going to cover it all. And I have a very special guest here who, once again, threatened me with violence if I excluded him from this particular podcast. I get a lot of that. Maybe it's because I talk about bad guys and everyone just kind of feels, hey, we can threaten them. Yeah, I don't know. I made my bed. I'm happy to lie in it. But Sean Comer is here, ladies and gentlemen, all the way from Fortress of Shaunitude, where I am sure right now he is lounging in a pile of Jeff Johns illustrated Green Lantern comics. How you doing, Sean?
Well, actually, we're kind of coming down to one of the last franchises wherein I would actually threaten violence against you if you didn't have me on. Unless, of course, you one day decide to do an episode devoted to the Mass Effect use.
I couldn't swear to it, but I wouldn't rule it out.
But, yeah, this is one where when the discussion comes down to arguably depending on the day you ask me or what issue I've just read, my number one or two favorite title, hero, mythos, whatever of the DC universe, yeah. this is one that I definitely wouldn't miss out on for anything at all in the world. So thank you for having me on. Thank you for tolerating the fact that I'm inevitably going to be crunching on this last Taco Bell taco while we talk brief. For the fact that I'm watching the opening demo of Injustice while we talk. And, also for the fact that I'm going to get this out of the way right now. Damn you, Cartoon Network. Damn you to hell. If I didn't hate you before, I damn Skippy Hippie sure hate you now.
Okay, explain that. Is this... I know you're a big fan, and I know the Green Lantern... For those of you who don't know, what Sean is kind of referencing here is the Green Lantern animated series from the 2000s, the most recent one, just became available for streaming on Netflix. So, do you hate the show, or do you hate that it was canceled?
I hate that it was canceled. Okay, you know what? To be honest, and I'm going to save some of this rant for a later date, because, as I'll discuss more toward the end of the show, there's something special that Mark Rodelich and I are working on for our signature podcast, Long Road to Ruin. And I don't want to give away all my thoughts on this show right now, because it's going to make it much less fun and much less organic when I get to talk about it later. However, this past week, all 26 episodes were added to Netflix for streaming. It only got a single season on Cartoon Network. And I had always been skeptical about it when I heard about it, because when it comes to animation, I always, even if you throw the likes of Pixar and Blue Sky into the mix, will prefer hand-drawn to CGI, especially when it comes to superheroes and comic characters, because the characters come so much more to life and have their own personalities when they're hand-drawn as opposed to just a bunch of rendered pixels. With that in mind, this show is absolutely superb. It is yet another DC Animated Universe triumph that I really have almost no complaints about, with the exception of, and again, we'll get to these a bit later in the show, with the exception of the way they decided to portray the Star Sapphires, the Zamaronians. But it is, for one thing, surprisingly visually engaging. I have my issues with it, but for the most part, it's like a DD stylized Incredibles with a lot less polish. It's that good, but it's well written, it's dramatic, it's emotional, it's funny. It is absolutely beautifully scored. It makes use of villains that really have been dramatically underused in other DCAU projects, and it brings them to absolutely fascinating life. Again, including another one that we'll probably get to a little bit later in the show as I get to discussing some more of the bad guys. And incredibly, this got only one goddamn season because the toys weren't selling. And it ends. No way am I spoiling this, because I actually really hope that I bat 1,000 and I get every single person listening to this to go out there and watch it. It ends on a really open-ended cliffhanger. Totally open-ended as to what could have come in the next season. So many directions they could have gone. And it stands alone just fine as one, but it still feels like it could have gone so much further. And this, in my opinion, might be right up there with Young Justice being canceled so early, as far as great tragedy superhero animation.
There's a lot of those.
God, and I don't get it. I don't get what ancient curse has been placed on DC that they are now and forever doomed to deal strictly with the most brain-injured, incompetent people possible to distribute and produce their shows. I don't understand. I don't know where they went wrong. Because on a good day, Warner Brothers bats about 500 when it comes to the live-action properties. They can't miss when it comes to animated. But live-action,
you're being generous.
Let's just say that in particular, Gavin Napier and I especially are going to have to agree to disagree with our opinion on certain live-action movies. But that's one thing. But then there's Cartoon Network. There's Justice League being cut off, which was done, actually, now that I really think about it, Justice League Unlimited, I should say, was cut off at the knees so that Cartoon Network could produce Young Justice, which then got
canceled.
Cut off, which then they canceled after only 2 seasons. We don't dare even mention Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, because, well, that's, for one thing, that's Marvel, but similar tragedy right there. But, goddamn, people, you people online, you're willing to write up goddamn petitions to try to get a brand new finale written for How I Met Your Mother, but no one out there is going to go launch an Indiegogo or a Kickstarter to try to get another season of a really great show.
Really? I couldn't help you there. I agree. People's tastes are strange. Here's the other thing about, as far as How I Met Your Mother, very brief tangent, then we're going to jump right into this. If you're going to go through that entire, 8 or 9 seasons, if you have not recognized, I haven't seen much of this, okay? So my information as far as this goes is gleaned from random episodes that I fall asleep watching one thing, I wake up and it's on that same channel.
Well,
Discussing with other people.
I'm listening in particular to Pat Mullen and Gavin Napier. He scores of voodoo curses upon it.
Well, look, I have no interest in the show. It doesn't appeal to me. I'm not a big comedy guy in general. Surprise, surprise. But if you have not paid attention to how little the writers and the producers and the directors, etc., care about how you feel about things, if you haven't picked up on the fact that, hey, look, here's a recurring cycling cast of people who may or may not actually be the mother, and then they're gone 2 weeks later, if you haven't picked up on the fact that these people don't care about your emotional attachment as far as that goes, you're just willfully ignorant of the subject. You have no one but yourself to blame.
I was talking to my friend Jeremy earlier, and Jeremy has been a devout, all 9 seasons long fan of the show. And he more or less, for a change, hit the nail right on the head with something. He said, I blame Mass Effect 3. Because, and you people all know who you are, damn you all, babies didn't get their bottles when Mass Effect 3 came out. And in something that is absolutely unprecedented, that I have never seen anywhere except maybe if you wanted to stretch the definition, Highlander 2, enough people bitched, complained, and panned the ending that BioWare actually finally sucked it up, waved the white flag, got the entire voice cast back together, and actually made a brand new ending. Well, it's kind of like how one-time fans got together and managed to bring back Firefly, so now everybody thinks that every show can and should be crowdfunded into a movie.
I dislike the precedent that particular thing set, because much as I enjoyed Firefly, and still do, and much as I enjoy Serenity, and nothing against them, the fact that the notion that if you make enough noise, you'll get what you want eventually, it's a bad precedent set, especially
and you know what?
For people.
Sometimes it can work wonders, but you have to take it case by case and think about, why am I really doing it? Because Firefly was one thing. That was a casualty of the fact that, no,
Fox
I don't care.
Things left and right?
Well, not just things, but in particular sci-fi. And no, don't so much as one of you, especially Starcher and Teasley, decide to throw back me, but Fringe got a long run. No.
It did.
It did, yes. But on the other hand, for every Fringe, if I thought about it long enough, I could probably throw back to you 2 Terra Novas and Doctor Who: The Enemy Within.
At least.
Yes, in general, of all the genres they try to produce, Fox does comedy exceptionally well. For the most part, they do drama pretty well. Sci-fi, monkeys, and typewriters.
The irony,
single ball.
The supreme irony of that statement is that Fox, by and large, wouldn't have grown to be as powerful as it was in the network position without the X-Files.
Oh, I could throw out a couple of shows that I could beg to differ with that.
Don't get me wrong. Married with Children was what made Fox into a viable broadcast entity. Let's all acknowledge that right now. Without Married with Children, we don't have Fox.
Yeah, but the X-Files, they were kind of like Diablo Cody with that one. They accidentally got it right once. And even then, that's another show that when they didn't cancel it too early, they let it go on years and years and years longer than it should have.
Oh, without a doubt. Okay. Before we get way too far off track here, let's bring this back towards some semblance of what I promoted this at.
This has all of a sudden become Everyone Hates Fox.
So, everyone hates Fox. No one's watching American Idol anymore. That's how much people hate Fox. All right. Of course, American Idol lost viewership because they lost Simon Cowell because, surprise, surprise, you took away the villain. Hey, I'm just saying. All right, so you're a big Green Lantern fan. Very briefly, what is it about, because Green Lantern is one of those characters that has not necessarily gotten the fairest of shakes, the most exposure. I mean, we got Ryan Reynolds, and God, I hate Ryan Reynolds. And I'm sure everyone out there I already had this discussion last week, actually somewhat in depth, about my dislike for Ryan Reynolds. So that's where I stand on it. I accept that there are people out there who like him and who enjoy what he does. Good for you. I don't. But we got him we got the crappy, overly CGI'd movie, but he's not a character that's got the exposure of, Superman, Batman, Iron Man, but at this particular point in time. I mean, he's a big player when you get into the universe, but he's not crossed over necessarily the way others have. So how did you kind of come to the character and the franchise?
Well, I'll tell you, it really took some digging. It really did. It really took my gaining a full understanding for the mythos and being willing to give it a chance, because the thing that I love about comics is it goes back to what I love about almost any kind of speculative fiction, almost any kind of fandom, and that is the idea, as it's been stated so many times, that they really are our modern-day myths. They are our parables. They are our fables. They are our equivalent to the ancient cave drawings. And by that I mean there's a sense when you're reading really the very best stories that are out there that you come away with some kind of lasting subtext that's going to stick with you amid all the obviously stunning and memorable visuals and all the, okay, that's just plain fucking cool moments. Because really, we read Batman and we come away with an appreciation for the depth of the dark tragedy in the best stories, the development of the characters, the richness of the visuals, but you don't really come away with all that much that you can look at and sort of see parallels to what's going on around you sometimes, or what's going on within you. It's kind of like that same principle that causes a lot of people to really latch on to the lessons of Star Trek sometimes, or Doctor Who. There's always that kind of jokey meme, everything I need to know about life I learned from insert famous franchise here.
All right.
Well, okay, so it is kind of for me in comics, and that is that my favorite stories are not just fun to look at, not just well-written, they're not just entertaining, but it's something where I feel like I'm taking part in something a little bit deeper. And with Green Lantern, for years, that wasn't really explored. If you go back and read about the first 25 appearances or so of in particular, Hal Jordan. I'm just going to ignore Alan Scott for right now, not necessarily out of disdain, but just because, well, to keep with the Doctor Who comparison, that's not my Green Lanterns. My Green Lanterns are not the magical Green Lantern era. They're the Hal Jordan, John Stewart, Guy Gardner, Kyle Rayner era. And, of course, Kilowog, because fucking Kilowog. But it's the fact that, for one thing, you got a weapon that's powered by will, and particularly when it comes to the whole idea of the yellow impurity, which is fully fleshed out later, it's explained and we come to realize that really part of the essence of will is what you're able to overcome with it. And in this case, it's the ability to overcome fear. And it's the idea that since there's that yellow impurity in every power ring, in Oa's main power battery, that can't really have will, and it's really pretty meaningless and powerless without having something that will has to overcome. And in this case, it's the very antithesis of it. It's fear. And that's to say nothing of what is really my favorite era and the one that I'm going to be focusing on with much of my commentary here, and that is the Jeff Johns era, in which he really explored a little bit deeper the circumstances of the story arc in which Hal Jordan, after the destruction of his hometown of Coast City by Mongol, was invaded and possessed by the essence of fear, Parallax, and gripped by the idea that he can't protect everyone around him. And all of a sudden, the man who is, according to the mythos, destined to overcome great fear is all of a sudden gripped by it, possessed by it, powered by it. It's all that he knows. And from there, he really does some unspeakable, horrible things, commits intergalactic genocide, breaks the neck, or so we think, of his arch all-time nemesis, Sinestro, and then has to go on this lengthy quest to really rebuild himself. I mean, who hasn't? A lot of us out there have at some point hit rock bottom at some point or another, and it can take any kind of permutation, any kind of form. We've all hit rock bottom and had to climb our way back up to that, and kind of reach that moment of kind of realizing our own redemption, and kind of being able to actually kind of believe in that kind of will that we all have. If you don't mind me sounding a little bit corny, because I mean, when you think about that, that's something that could really kind of exist within anyone. So you can look to that and sort of be inspired by it, and kind of realize that even though maybe, yeah, the exact visuals and exact characters and everything are definitely far-flung and pretty much impossible, that there's still that little bit of truth in it that you can believe in because you've lived it. So, I mean, that's why I was really glad when I started reading comics, and on the advice of my good friend Cole Marentet, I started reading the Jeff Johns run, and I realized, okay, this is some of the actual best real development and fleshing out and humanization of a character that I've ever read in any comic. It's not quite as overdrawn as a lot of the same attempts are in Marvel or even other DC books. He kind of really cleans house on what had been a pretty boring character with a pretty messed up mythos, and kind of really proves something that Ben and I were talking about the other night. And Ben said there really is. I said I really don't buy this excuse that it's just a boring character. And I think he was getting at that the idea that a character is really only as good and as creative and as well fleshed out as the person who's kind of wielding him or her, or even them in some cases, is willing to make them. So that's kind of a long way around to it, but that's kind of my thoughts, especially on Hal Jordan. I sort of have my opinions on Guy Gardner and Jon Stewart and Kyle Rayner, but, you know, Hal Jordan is my Tom Baker. He's my David Tennant. You know, he's my Lantern. Doesn't mean I can't appreciate the other ones, except for Kyle, the little emo pussy. But you know, for the most part, Hal's my guy. You say Green Lantern, that's who I think.
All right. In any instance wherein there have been multiple be they characters or actors or however, you know, whatever your permutation happens to be, there's always going to be one that you, for whatever reason, that's your personal emotional attachment to it. That's just the way that is, and everyone does it to different people for different reasons. Life kind of moves on from there. So you mentioned Sinestro, and he's kind of the arch villain of the Green Lantern Corps. He's kind of the big one, the one that gets played up and whatnot. So let's start here, since we're going to be examining villains. Let's go ahead and tackle Mr. Forehead himself, Sinestro. So you know, if you can kind of give some background. I mean, I've done my research on this one, but I'm not as up to date on all the minutiae necessarily as other people are. So I'm going to defer the details and whatnot to you. But Sinestro was one of the more respected, more powerful Green Lanterns, if memory serves. He was a member of the Corps, well thought of. It just happened to be that while he was doing all this, he decided that the best way to ensure order, which is ostensibly the goal of the Corps, was to become a dictator over his home planet and rule them through fear, which is like the worst thing ever to the rest of the Green Lantern Corps. And that's kind of what shifts his core philosophy from what everyone else kind of believes to where he goes, which is, you know, if we want order in the world, then we're going to have the best way to do it is through fear. Ironically enough, something also touched on in the latest Captain America movie, which I saw today. Definitely worth your time and money, folks. So just your perspective on kind of Sinestro, how he got to where he is, and the fact that he feels and debatably is justified in his point of view.
He started out as being cast as, from the very beginning, as Green Lantern's greatest nemesis, in the same way that it happens with a lot of villains throughout a lot of books and throughout a lot of other stories, not just comic books, in that he was equal but opposite to Hal in many ways. If you go clear back to his original origin, he even came upon the Ring in the same way, in that his sector's Green Lantern crash-landed near where he was working as an anthropologist, keeping in mind, of course, a little bit differently, okay, you have somebody kind of working primarily with the Earth and among its, or not Earth necessarily, but just kind of the ground beneath his feet, and with the cultures that surrounded him in reconstructions of a long-dead civilization's ruins. And Hal, of course, was a test pilot who spent all of his time in the air. So it's kind of as above, so below, if you were to look at it that way. And accordingly, just the same way Abin Sur did with Hal Jordan, the Ring was passed to him very quickly because it was a dying Lantern with his last breath, and neither of them initially really fully understood what the Ring was capable of. They just came upon it, they had to make a decision, and greatness, even in Sinestro's case it was terrible greatness, was thrust upon him. And what happened, as you mentioned, was he ascended to become, up until the rise of Hal Jordan, the greatest ever Green Lantern in the Corps' history. So much so...
Briefly about just remind me, didn't he let that Green Lantern die?
Something like that.
I remember from what I was reading, he came down, the guy passed him the ring, he fought off the Quards or whatever, and after he successfully defended himself and the people and whatnot, the other Lantern, who's still mortally wounded, goes, okay, give it back, I can protect myself long enough to get medical assistance, and Sinestro looked at the ring and looked at that guy and kind of went, I like this. Nah, you can die.
That is indeed true. That is, and as was the case with Abin Sur, he just died. He was mortally wounded. Nothing that Hal could do was going to save him. So
they're similar, but same but opposite, right?
Right. Well,
okay.
And from the time that they met very early on in the Silver Age Green Lantern run, it was a battle of Hal wielding the green power of will versus Sinestro always finding a way to wield the yellow impurity. And this was before, I believe if I'm recalling it correctly, and I can always grab one of my copies of Green Lantern Chronicles sitting here on my coffee table behind me and look it up, before he really had a ring to him, because this was well before probably before Jeff Johns was even a twinkle in his daddy's scrotum. And we had the idea of Sinestro actually having his own ring. But he was always finding a way to make that the way that he got one over on Hal. And it was all because he wanted revenge, because Hal had superseded him as being one of the greatest potentially most powerful members of the Green Lantern Corps. And again, they're so equal but opposite. They're always able to match each other, seemingly move for move, and Hal is just never able to be entirely rid of him. It's, in fact, so much so that it's fitting that is the very first menace in Green Lantern Rebirth that Hal encounters immediately after his body rises from its coffin, is Sinestro being ready to wipe Green Arrow and Kyle Rayner, well, basically ready to make them stains on the floor of the Watchtower. And that's always the way it is between those two. It's kind of like how the Joker is always making the assertion that he and Batman are tied because in some ways they might be just a little bit alike. They're opposite but equal. If you look at some of Superman's greatest villains, they're the ones who whose motivations are opposite of his, but whose origins are very similar. It's one of those cases where somebody makes a left turn instead of a right, and things could have been completely different.
Yeah. So
that's kind of what keeps him compelling, right up to and including the amazing storyline of the Sinestro Corps War.
Yeah, he after the Green Lantern Corps kind of defeats and defames him, they imprison him. He becomes bitter, and he gets a hold of a yellow power ring, which is powered by fear. Kind of long story short there that I'm paraphrasing here, obviously. Forms his own corps and decides that fear is the appropriate way to rule the galaxy. Fear of this battle station to be... sorry. Random Star Wars reference, but... So he forms his own corps to kind of combat the Green Lantern. And
I don't know, actually, now that you think about it, now that I really stop to think about the Sinestro Corps War, you could really kind of almost think of ranks kind of the same way.
That's true.
I mean, big fucking living planet.
Yeah, that's very true. What was it? And, well, the other thing about Sinestro is, we touched on this, he's, extraordinarily powerful. I mean, he keeps, wasn't he possessed by Parallax at one point? Was the acceptable host?
I'm trying to remember if he was or not. I know that at one point, though, it was actually Sinestro that
he merged with the entity.
He was kind of responsible for helping to kind of sick Parallax on Hal Jordan, because at one point they were both imprisoned in the Central Power Battery.
Oh, okay. But just the other thing that came to my mind was, I think it was in the Blackest Night storyline, where he was the first one to kind of merge with the entity, which is the essence of life, the white light.
You know what? Yeah, you're right. I think you're right.
Didn't work out because the guy's an egomaniac and couldn't put that aside to properly utilize the power of the entity, which is... And so, Hal wound up doing it, and they defeated Necron and the Black Hand, and they overcame the Black Lantern Corps, and there's zombies with superpowers, for anyone who hasn't really read it, if you just want a really abbreviated version.
Black Hand. There's another villain that Jeff Johns really made into far more than he ever had a right being.
Well, he starts out as... Let's find him. I have my list here.
Well, let's face it. At first, Black Hand, especially as we're starting out the Jeff Johns run, was a little bit of a throwaway. He really wasn't necessarily taken especially seriously. It was just kind of once he lost his hand, and then once, hang on, I'm actually kind of pulling my issue so I can look this up. This is the thing about comics.
Yeah, well, initially he starts off as just like a criminal inventor. He winds up losing his hand courtesy of Hal Jordan, and I believe that might have been Alan Scott. Couldn't swear to it.
Well, and here's one of those things, and I kind of noticed the other day because funny little Uncle Sean anecdote time here. I'm not going to give it away here on the air because it's part of my private life, and I'm going to keep it fairly private. But as part of my day job, I joined this professional forum, but I wanted to keep some measure of anonymity. So I didn't go and create something with my handle for it with my full name, but I had to make something that among this fairly laid-back bunch of people was going to be pretty innocuous. So, of course, I made my handle Sean Lantern 2814. My friend Scarlett, who happens to be a moderator on that forum, got a hold of me and didn't happen to have recognized my name right away. And so I had to she was wanting to know, but kind of figured it out over time, and kind of asked me what it was that it meant, and I was sitting here trying to explain both the fact that I was a Green Lantern fan and also what the 2814 meant, which, of course, is the galactic center which the Earth Green Lanterns patrol. And it dawned on me in my head as I was explaining this. If you are a fan of the quote-unquote wrong comic book, every time you try to explain that comic's lineage to a non-fan, you are going to sound like a gibbering mental patient.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter in the least. And the thing I'm trying to look up, by the way, guys, for the record, is I'm trying to look up the names of the aliens that gifted Black Hand with the power to kill anything and everything with his touch. I'm trying to find him as I bring the show.
I've got Wikipedia up here. It says, part of his newly written background, his energy-absorbing weapon is now portrayed as being built by Atrocitus. Comes to Earth looking for a being who will coordinate the events that would lead to Blackest Night. Stopped by Hal Jordan and Sinestro, because he tries to take the power out of his body. Yeah, it looks like Atrocitus had the weapon, and that's kind of where it came from.
Well, it's not, yeah, actually that is right. You're right there. Again, this stuff all runs together sometimes. This is why it's good to have two people on a show like this. Kind of like last week when I apparently made Ben Stinky Parts hurt when I kept mistaking Jim Lee for Tim Sale. Hi, Ben. But
honest mistake.
Yeah. But just that one little turn really takes it, and you can do that with a character, but you really have to have the right person in charge. Because, case in point, what happens otherwise is what seems to happen repeatedly with Harley Quinn. And don't get me wrong, I like Harley. Harley's a fun girl. Always fun to have around. However, she is the Jeff Jarrett, the Shane Douglas, the Alberto Del Rio of comic book characters to me. And that it's somebody that you don't mind having a heavily featured role, but you really don't want her to be your main villain.
It's generally stretching credulity.
Well, yeah, because, you know, while the personality makes her a great supporting actress, so to speak, there's nothing convincing that really makes her seem like she should, logically, ever be a match for the world's greatest detective. Ever. And yet, it feels like so many times, especially since she expanded from the animated series into comics and whatnot, and into video games, that's what people keep trying to do. They keep trying to make her somewhat more of a featured villainess. And in a comparison that I made the other day, it's a lot like if you were to come up with a wrestling program that combined Heath Slater with John Cena. Okay, now if you wrote it the right way and you had the right person back, someone that was really great with storylines, like, say, Paul Heyman, for example. Oh, you could quite easily build up Heath Slater over time into somebody that would seem like a convincing match for years. ROH booked their entire promotion around this idea. You know, the idea of building everybody up to be competitive and the best in the world.
Come on, they had Delirious in there with Bryan Danielson.
Well, yeah, exactly. They do matches like that all the time, but the way they managed to do it, they managed to do it while building. They managed to do you guys to build them up, and actually, kind of like, you know, has been done with Jeff Hardy so many times, they actually are built up to the point to where you convincingly believe by about midway into the match, holy shit, this could actually happen. I am totally buying this guy right now. Well, the thing is, work just spontaneously out of nowhere after months upon years upon years of Heath having his head shoved up his ass by everyone from Zack Ryder to the Great Khali. You all of a sudden just have him cleanly, in about 2 minutes, beat John Cena 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring with a clothesline. You are going to cry bullshit to all of the seventh heaven and Oa and Asgard, and as far as ears can hear, you're going to cry bullshit on that because it is bullshit. It's not believable. It's not convincing, and it's not compelling. Well, so it is when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're trying to make a mentally unbalanced bimbo of an ex-psychiatrist out to be somebody who could end the Caped Crusader. Fuck you!
Yeah, it's
I'm not gonna
a bit
that.
much.
Well, no, but
it's just a bit much.
But that just makes it all the easier to appreciate what Jeff Johns was able to do with someone like Black Hand. All of a sudden, you've taken that one turn, and you've managed to turn Black Hand around, and you've made him the spark that sets off this entire doomsday process. And I'll be damned, it works. It absolutely works. So
yeah, well, I mean, Blackest Night that was their like annual crossover event for that time around, wasn't it? I mean, everybody was involved in it. And for those of you who don't know, and I'm going to paraphrase here from what I remember from my research and whatnot, the Black Power Ring finds its way to Earth, and the Black Ring is powered by death. and Black Hand gets a hold of it, and he starts resurrecting heroes. Well, he turns them into basically superpowered zombies. I mean, I think Superman was one, or a version of Superman.
Superman, Batman, Barry Allen, I think.
Yeah, and so all of these superheroes are now zombified and come back, and they still have all of their powers, so we're not talking just straight walkers here. And it, creates a huge problem. And eventually obviously they win, they solve the problem, that actually leads to the formation of the White Lantern, kind of a first step of thing. But you take a throwaway character, and if you do it properly, he becomes the linchpin of this huge crossover event.
I have to laugh. Ben so graciously says that I'm forgiven for last week.
He's a gentleman and a scholar.
Oh, he definitely, absolutely. Solexo.com. Go check his website out. Check out his comic, and while you're at it, harangue both him and Linkara from That Guy with the Glasses about when the next edition of Revolution of the Mask is coming.
Yes. All right, but when figuring that out, we brought up Atrocitus, and he is another really kind of interesting character who, if you listen, last week when I talked about symbiotes, I mentioned that everybody gets to be an anti-hero. Apparently that includes Point. But he leads the Red Lantern Corps. Now, for those of you, just as a brief, kind of Cliff Notes version, all of these guys are attached to some part of the emotional spectrum: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. So, your basic rainbow. And each of those colors is associated with a specific emotion. In the case of red, guess what? It's rage. And Atrocitus is in charge of the Red Lantern Corps. He is the epitome of rage. He goes around and his sole purpose in life is to cause as much havoc and violence as possible. Am I right about that, or am I missing? Because I've been known to over things.
Do you want to kill the lanterns?
No.
Their guts across the hall.
No.
I hardly ever see them anymore. I've started talking to the pictures on the wall.
All right, enough of that. That song is invading. Invading.
That one is for you, Jesse Starcher.
All right.
Hey, he was the one that earlier on, one of the comment threads on Facebook, posted a picture of Atrocitus and said he was really looking forward to us discussing it. So.
And now you've reduced him to singing Do You Want to Build a Snowman?
Anyway, I am the Randall to your Dante.
Something like that, yes.
Okay. Anyway, all seriousness though. No, Atrocitus is one of those characters that I don't think has quite yet really fully gotten his due, but it's hard to really say that since he's a product of Jeff Johns and Ethan Van Siever, who is the artist who has done some absolutely spectacular work, particularly leading up from Jeff's debut with Rebirth all the way up through the Sinestro Corps War. And he really is a great anti-hero, and one of my favorite depictions of him, in addition to the gorgeous way that he is, the gorgeous and pants-crappingly terrifying way that he's drawn in the comics, is actually the way he's portrayed in the animated series on Cartoon Network. Both because he's voiced and written incredibly well, but because for much of the show, it's not, for a change, they're not going with the knee-jerk main villain you'd expect them to. But he and the Red Lantern Corps are sort of the big, overarching big bad for about half of the series. And it kind of becomes a take on the rage of the Red Lantern, which, in continuity-wise, actually follows up the Sinestro Corps War. So he becomes one of those people wherein, and we were talking about this before the show, you kind of understand where he's coming from. You really do believe that he goes a bit too far with every time apparently being half-past murder o'clock. But when you find out that way back once upon a time, the Manhunters, as created by the Guardians of the Universe, wiped out his homeworld, you kind of don't blame him for being a little on the angry side. You kind of have to go, you have to kind of borrow from Chris Rock. what was he said that I said something like, God, my mind is just blanking here. Something like, I wouldn't do it, but I understand.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, he has declared just nothing less than an endless war of attrition, an utter, all-encompassing fatwa against the Green Lantern Corps and anybody who gets in his way whatsoever. But it also gets to the point that he eventually sort of becomes a little bit of an anti-hero.
Well, it looks like, and I'm going just off of my research and what I've read, he decides that the Red Lanterns are now, to kind of feed their rage and whatnot, instead of just blindly being rage, because that's what fuels their power, he performs blood rituals, which seems to be a recurring theme with him, using, entrails and viscous materials and other bodily excretions. Performs a ritual, and he sees all of the evil being committed across the universe, and he decides the Red Lantern Corps is now going to punish the guilty. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of and so I believe that's kind of how you make the shift from he wants to destroy everything just because Azathoth, Lovecraft fans get the reference. He goes from that to a bit more, all right, you do bad things, then we get to vent our rage on you in a type of scenario.
It's funny because after a while, if you start reading up Green Lantern, the theme you start picking up on is everybody genuinely believes they can do the Guardians of the Universe's job better than they can.
Yeah, and, well, that tends to happen when you're emotionally unbalanced, which all of these people kind of by definition are. They tap into, by their own phrasing, one aspect of the emotional spectrum. And if you don't have the whole thing...
Well, yeah, and again, that goes back to the thing that I mentioned about the best stories being the ones that you can relate to on a deeper level. And that is the idea that absolutely any emotion that you can possibly think of is just fine when it's in the right measure. But taken to its extreme, it is always going to be at least a little bit destructive. I mean, even consider Hal Jordan's great willpower. It often makes him unwilling to listen to reason, cooperate with others, think completely about consequences sometimes.
Doesn't he... I mean, you mentioned that after his hometown is destroyed, he goes a little crazy and becomes possessed by Parallax, who is the embodiment of fear. I vaguely recall some other arc with him wherein he just decided he was going to either rebuild Coast City, something like that, and after he accomplishes this, he sits there and says, I'm good here. You guys do your thing. I'll take care of this. Am I confusing that with something else, or...?
No, there is something like that. I don't know if we're talking about maybe the same thing in different language here, but
Probably.
Actually that's one of the really early pivotal moments of Rebirth that kind of shows that there's something exceptional going on here, is when Hal, powered by the Spectre, the spirit of vengeance, does indeed do just that. He starts rebuilding Coast City, rebuilds his old apartment building, rebuilds Ferris Aircraft, which is where he has a very nice little reunion with Carol Ferris.
Does he rebuild his refrigerator?
Wrong Lantern, that's Kyle Rayner.
I know. I'm aware. I know.
Actually, Carol is not that bad once you get her out of the Silver Age and the me era.
Well, she's, the early iterations of the Star Sapphire, if we're continuing on, just to get back to the emotional spectrum, the Star Sapphires, powered by Violet, and aren't they the emotion of love in all of its various forms, which are not always healthy?
They are. Well, what they are is they are sort of estranged members of the Guardians race who came to a schism with the Guardians because the Guardians believed that the way to keep order and peace throughout the universe was restrain emotion from everything and to distance themselves from the emotional spectrum. And the Zamarons believed that, spreading love throughout the universe and making love the dominant force, that is the way that you keep everything under control and in order. And again, what we end up getting is the Zamarons become the bearers of the Star Sapphires, and their force becomes just complete, unabashed, all-consuming, all-controlling, virtually obsessive love.
Well, love is insanity, kind of by definition. If it's out of balance, it's highly unhealthy.
Well, yeah, and I mean that's one that has not changed with time, like some of the other characters we've talked about. That goes clear back to Showcase Volume 1, Issue 22, back in 1959, the very first appearance of. Oh, wait, you know what? I stand corrected. I misread my notes here. That is the first appearance of Carol Ferris. I'm sorry. The first appearance of Carol as a Star Sapphire was in Green Lantern Volume 2, number 16 in 1962, because the Zamorons, as opposed to them having a beef with the Guardians, which was fleshed out later, at this point, it's just a matter of they believe that men are inferior. So they decide to make Carol Ferris, who at the time was seriously crushing on Green Lantern, and to a somewhat developing extent Hal Jordan, and make them go to battle to prove the female superiority. So, but, I mean, that's something that eventually gets removed from her when Hal dies, lets himself be consumed by the sun, and is possessed by the spirit of the Spectre. So, but, I mean, from that point on, yeah, it still becomes a matter of, in terms of the emotional spectrum, the Star Sapphire believing that they're doing the right thing by thinking, and it kind of makes sense, that if everybody would just love each other, well, there would be no more violence, there would be no more war, there would be no more conflict. However, that of course gives way to possessive, determined jealousy, as is the case in real life when love is inevitably corrupted. So, once more, that's it.
I think the only one of the emotional spectrum guys who doesn't necessarily believe, objectively speaking, that he's in the right might be the Orange Lantern. Is that Larfleeze? Forget his name.
I don't know, because you've also got the Blue Lantern, who are kind of they're kind of the Hare Krishnas of the Lantern Corps.
Well, they believe, for those of you who don't know, the Blue Lantern Corps, they're powered by hope, but their full power can only be exercised when in proximity to a Green Lantern, because hope without willpower is essentially meaningless. The orange spectrum represents avarice or greed, and there is one guy who is just too damn greedy to share his power, so he creates constructs and sends them out.
Oh, Larfleeze, who was hilariously depicted in the animated series. They didn't really make him a very threatening force in that episode. That would kind of be one of my two real gripes with how they depicted someone, because in that, he wasn't really necessarily much of a force in combat. He had just been kind of driven mad to this. He was kind of the Gollum of the emotional spectrum. And the whole time, they were actually trying to get the Orange Lantern away from Hal, who had decided to pick it up as a means of combating the Anti-Monitor. But not really knowing what he had in his hands, he became possessed by it, and of course, he became the big bad harbinger of greed. Whereas, Larfleeze just wanted his shiny back.
Must have the precious.
No, seriously, that was what he called it. It's one of those where you can be kind of entertained by the episode, but at the same time, you're never going to be able to tear your mind away from the fact they were really just riffing off the end of Return of the King.
And just in the interest of full disclosure, the final color in the emotional spectrum is indigo, and don't they have empathy? And their ability is they can recreate the powers of other rings, and they have teleportation somewhere in there.
Well, isn't indigo just a shade of blue, though?
I never counted it as its own color, but that's just me. It's kind of what happens when you on the border of blue and purple, which is, I suppose, why they went with empathy, because it kind of meshes.
Well, I'm kind of looking at. Well, I'm trying to make sure that we're not talking about different groups, the same group of different languages, or if we're talking about different groups here, because their theme is compassion.
Oh, okay. I misspoke then. I either got it wrong or what. No, compassion makes more sense. So.
Yeah, okay. You know what? They are different groups, because I was thinking of Saint Walker of the Blue Lantern Corps.
Oh, okay.
Who, like I said, they were the ones that I called the Hare Krishnas of the emotional spectrum, because, as you said, they rely on hope, and hope is useless without will, obviously.
It's a nice thing to have, but on its own, it provides very little.
Well, yeah, and in turn, hope amplifies will. It's a catalyst.
Yeah.
It's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, so empathy was what the Indigo guys had, and that's the full range of the emotional spectrum for everybody out there. If you're deciding where you fall as far as that goes, and that's ignoring black and white, which are death and life respectively.
Show of hands. Go to the Long Road to Ruin Facebook page and tell me how many of you after that discussion just went a little bit cross-eyed.
I think I went cross-eyed and I was part of it. We have a caller here. All right, area code 304. You're live on the air, and we're talking Green Lantern villains. What do you got for us?
What's up, guys? It's Gavin from Casual Heroes.
Hey, Gavin.
Hey, Gavin.
I meant to get a hold of you for this one and ask if you wanted to be a part of it. I'm sorry. I must have lost track of time.
No, it actually, okay. I've been able to listen to all but maybe the first 15 minutes of it. We had a unexpected interview. Yeah, we had an unexpected interview pop up for the Casual Heroes that ran for about an hour, so I got in a little bit late. But I've been listening to the color spectrum discussion with great glee, and I love Larfleeze, and I don't know if you guys are keeping up with the comic books at this point. The Green Lantern family are the only books from DC that I still buy after the New 52 reboot, and I don't know about the animated series and how he was portrayed there, but he has become quite the cosmic powerhouse in DC at this point in the comic book. It's written by comedic writers extraordinaire, Giffen and DeMatteis, who handled the old Justice League International book that was such a hit with Martian Manhunter declaring his love for Oreos and the shenanigans of Thurgold and Blue Beetle. They are now behind Larfleeze, and he's currently going to war with an entire family of gods and coming out on top. So he's quite the powerhouse in the comic book world. And
in the animated series, as I said, he appears once. He appears in one episode very late in the series in the lead-up to the battle with the Aya Monitor. And as I said, he's really given no depth. He is just nothing less than Gollum-like guardian of the Orange Battery. That's all he. And when I say Gollum-like, it's right down to him just calling the lantern his shiny.
Yeah, and we sort of go that route in the comic book as well. Everything is either my shiny or simply mine. Everything is mine for Larfleeze. Yeah. But I really think he's one of the most enduring creations from Jeff Johns' era on the book. Out of the dozen years that he was there, I really think that of all the characters that he introduced to the mythos, I think that will be the one that stands the test of time the most. And just real quickly on the Indigo Lanterns, during Blackest Night, it was sort of revealed that while they do have compassion, they are not nice people, that they are Indigo Lanterns as a method of punishment because they have all committed terrible, terrible crimes, and remove their staff and move the Indigo light from them, and they will go back to being terrible, terrible people. So there's your incense on the Indigo Lanterns, because they haven't really done a whole lot with them. They speak a gibberish language, and they don't ever really translate it for us, and they become sort of a deus ex machina when they need somebody teleported or they need a way to back themselves out of a corner that they've painted themselves into. But other than that, there's not been a whole lot done with it.
Thanks for the clarification there. You want to stick around for the rest of this, or?
Yeah, I'll hang around for a while. No, I don't have anywhere to be. I've got about 20% battery left on my phone, but I'll hang around for as long as it'll let me.
All right. Since you're just joining us here, anything you wanted, any guys that we haven't touched on or that we have that you want to have your say on?
I think you guys have done Green Lantern's my favorite comic character of all time, so whichever way you go, I'm going to be able to jump in on whoever it is. I could run down the list of Green Lantern's rogue galleries. The only thing that I really want to touch on before we definitely close up shop here are the active villains that are in the Green Lantern series, the main Green Lantern series now, and that's the Durlans. I don't know how familiar you guys are with them.
I am not.
Honestly, I haven't read the New 52 at all because I'm still kind of playing catch-up with the oldies of the series, and I keep hearing very mixed opinions of almost everything of the New 52.
Well, I abandoned it entirely except for Green Lantern because essentially DC was telling me we value new customers' potential money more than the existing money that you are spending on our company. And with that being the opinion, I was happy to spend my money elsewhere, but I couldn't give up Green Lantern. I've been a fan since the 80s with the Adams and O'Neill run of Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and I couldn't, for lack of a better phrase, from Brokeback Mountain, I just couldn't quit him. So, and it got a little lucky there for a while with the introduction of Simon Boz as a publicity stunt and the nonsense that was all of that. But once things shifted back to Hal Jordan in his rightful place as the Green Lantern, I gave it a chance, and I've been happy with it. And I'll throw in a quick shameless plug here. It's currently being written by a friend of the Casual Heroes, Robert Winfree, who's an award for Valiant Comic Book. He did the screenplay and the story behind Surrogates, which became the Bruce Willis movie. He's done some graphic novel adaptations of Percy Jackson, and if you're interested in his thoughts on what it's like to be a part of the Green Lantern mythos, again, shameless plug, go over to the Casual Heroes on iTunes and look up our Robert Venditti interview. He gave us about an hour of his time. So give you a bit of insight onto how he's approaching this. But the Durlans are the current villain, and I've enjoyed them because they are a shape-shifting race that is very Lovecrafty in appearance. They have the non-Euclidean geometry look. They're just a mass of tentacles and glowing red eyes. And they're using their shape-shifting abilities to make everyone think that the Lanterns are doing terrible things and turn the entire universe against them one sector at a time. So they're an interesting villain, and Robert Venditti has done a very good job with the series of late in keeping it off of Earth, because I think that was one of the problems with Green Lantern through the years, is because they're supposed to be this intergalactic space force, and everything keeps happening on Earth. And he's pretty well removed them from Earth in their entirety, and now everything takes place in space, which is where Green Lantern should take place. He's Marvel's counterpart to the Silver Surfer. And it's been an interesting run, and I've really enjoyed the Durlans as these very intelligent, ancient, manipulative enemies of the Green Lantern Corps.
Hey, I'm always down for anything Lovecraftian.
Pardon?
I mean, I'm down for anything Lovecraft. I got an Azathoth joke in here earlier. I was happy with it.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look that up. All right. We talked about Sinestro. We talked about, let's see, I got my list of main ones I wanted to hit here.
How do we not talk about the Manhunt?
All right, they're there. They're on my list. Okay. So, all right, go ahead, Sean. Give us the introduction to the Manhunters.
Well, the Manhunters are fun because, in a way, they're kind of like both, kind of mixed fantasy a little bit. They're kind of like a combination of the Putty Patrol and the Cybermen of the Green Lantern Corps. They're like the Cybermen in that, without obviously so much the motivation to try to assimilate everybody, they prey on everything that exhibits even the slightest emotion, something that is used to great effect in the animated series and excellent effect throughout the comics as well. On the other hand, I make the Putty Patrol comparison in that they are perpetually doled out good, passionate ass whippings from every member of the Boys in Green that they come across.
They got the Zerg thing going. We have numbers, right? Enough of us will overwhelm you. And in the interim, any five of us will just be absolutely obliterated in humiliating fashion by a semi-sentient 8-year-old.
Like you need bad guy version of the red shirts. You gotta have somebody that the guys can get an easy win over from time to time.
Even the villains need jobbers too, right?
Absolutely. They need their Barry Horth and their Iron Mike
and their Heat Slaters.
I am currently calling about 25 minutes away from the town Slater grew up in, Southern Virginia.
All right, so you're right. You need the Putty Patrol. You've got to have those things. I mean,
but the other interesting thing is they're kind of nice in that they're also kind of like the Autons, sort of the easily manipulated soldiers for hire of the same mythos. In that, depending on which medium you look at, let's see, they've kind of been wielded and manipulated by Superboy Prime, who manages to craft them into creatures that don't just prey on anything with an emotion, but actually to focus specifically on great sources of willpower. But also, okay, again, back to the animated series, they also become the foot soldiers of the Anti-Monitor in the absolutely amazing epic arc that builds throughout the entire second half of the one and only season. And so they're kind of able to really be pretty well molded to and adaptable to whatever the main big bad really needs. So in that alone, it kind of gives them kind of an interesting dynamic of, okay, what has so-and-so done to them now? And it always manages to make them kind of just a little bit of a threat because, again, as you guys pointed out, they've got numbers, but also there's the interesting fact that they are the precursors to the Green Lantern Corps. The Guardians always wanted somebody to police the universe. It's just that they kind of had to go through a little bit of trial and error. There was the whole thing where the Manhunters murdered indiscriminately.
Which is a problem. In the system. There's always some bugs in the system, right?
Right.
It wouldn't be a system.
And actually, that kind of brings to mind the fact that every so often in Green Lantern, you get a great appearance from another larger deity presence. And it's almost always kind of intriguing. Like how in the Green Lantern Corps, or not the Green Lantern, Sinestro Corps War. I mean, this wasn't just Sinestro they were combating. Oh no. It was the fact that the Green Lantern Corps was butting up against a combination of Sinestro, Parallax, Ranks, Superboy Prime, and the lieutenant of that whole bunch is the fucking Anti-Monitor, the big overlord of bad that pretty much nearly wiped out absolutely all of existence in arguably the most famous DC storyline of all time, Crisis on Infinite Earths. And he's more or less a second in command. I mean, that was kind of, I remember reading that and thinking, okay, that was when you knew shit had gotten real. That was kind of when you knew that Sinestro was really a force to be reckoned with, was when you realized this is the guy who's taking orders from him.
You know, the better your underlings are, the better you look.
Yeah. And that's the thing about Jeff really having a good sense of the whole universe and really a good understanding of character. And at some point, I'll admit, Jeff went off the rails himself. As my buddy Cole put it, at one point he just kind of suffered from burnout after Blackest Night.
Yeah, he had a lot going on. I think it reflected the increase in his duties across the DC universe as a whole. When left to focus on just Green Lantern, he was doing wonderful things. And unfortunately, he was too good at Green Lantern, so he gets drafted into doing a completely unnecessary but entertaining reboot of Superman's origin with Secret Origin, with art done by the magnificent Gary Frank. Then he does the same thing with Flash and the Flash rebirth that he did for Green Lantern, which was fantastic because he has this passion for the Flash. It's admittedly his favorite character in the Rogues Gallery, and he loves them. But instead of devoting all of his energy to the Green Lantern project that he had spent so much time and care building up, all of a sudden you're seeing Jeff Johns having to take his talents and his creative juices and spread them across 3, 4, 5 different titles at a time. And I think that was where you saw things start to go off the rails.
Paul Heyman's system, right?
Yep.
And that's one of those things where, again, it comes back to, and Jeff is hit or miss for a lot of people. I've seen, surprisingly enough to me anyway, because he's one of my favorite writers, some pretty staunch criticism of him online. And the fact is, not every writer is going to be well-suited to every book. And this is just some advice to anybody else out there who, like me, is kind of a late-in-life comic nerd. Realize that results are sometimes going to vary, because to a certain extent, sometimes you just get a character, you make a connection, and everything just comes out so easily. The stories tell themselves so well, it almost seems like you don't have to really put any thought into it. Such would be the case with the fact that Jeff did such a wonderful job with Green Lantern and with the somewhat controversial decision to bring Barry Allen back as the Flash in the Flash Rebirth. But
that's one of those that there's the ongoing joke in comics that no one stays dead except for Uncle Ben.
No.
But wasn't Barry Allen's resurrection one of the few, one of those times when you get a character brought back from their death that meant something, and the story bringing them back actually made sense?
Well, it did, but the only thing is there are some times where a character has been killed off in comics, and it actually has not proven to be a good decision to bring him back. And that's partially because in death, they ended up, or sometimes, that I'll illustrate here in a second, in death sometimes not so much even in death, but just kind of under certain circumstances, a tragic event can actually make that character something even more, even though they're seemingly irrevocably changed, than they ever were before it. The thing about Barry Allen's death that meant so much was the way that he died, in that in Crisis on Infinite Earths, he dies trying to buy the universe time against the Anti-Monitor, and knows full well what he's doing by sacrificing his life just to dish out this one major defeat that's going to give him some time to regroup. And it was incredibly noble. It was obviously more than a little bit sad, but it was seen as being the crowning act of his career. And so to not only bring him back like that was seemingly almost to kind of diminish the meaning of that, in that it almost doesn't seem like quite as big a sacrifice because it's not even like he stayed dead. The next best comparison to that would be the equally controversial decision to give Barbara Gordon back the use of her legs. Of course, she lost them in the beloved, all-time great Alan Moore story, The Killing Joke, when the Joker shot her clean the spine and then used her degradation and helpless humiliation to try to break Commissioner Gordon into madness. And in turn, sometime after that, she reemerged as Oracle. And something wholly unexpected happened. She became somewhat of an icon to fans with disabilities, much the same way that Daredevil had in Marvel, as being a symbol and a reminder that just because you might have lost the ability to physically use part of your body, it didn't diminish your potential as a person, and nor did it really take away who you were. And so when that was undone, I think a lot of fans took that as saying, oh, look, see, she's so much better now that she can use her legs again. Well, no, not really. Not really. Actually, had you just kind of left her that way, she kind of became, God, I'm going to use the Star Wars cliche, you struck her down and she became more powerful than you ever could have imagined. And you just kind of wiped all that away. I mean, there's a difference between moments like that and something like Dan Jurgens and the team at DC decides to kill off Superman, gives the world a look into what the world would be like without him, and then all of a sudden, as planned all along, he gets brought back.
That's true.
Yeah, and not only was he brought back, but he was kind of brought back, and as I recall from what little Superman I read after that, there was never really any sense that he had been changed by the whole thing.
Actually, I think, technically speaking, it does more to change Doomsday than to change Superman.
Well, yeah, exactly. And but to bring this back around to Green Lantern, though, that's the thing about what Jeff did with Hal that was so special. Hal was driven mad in the storyline because the writers really had no idea what else to do with him. They saw him as being boring and limited. And yes, it's a controversial storyline. It's not exactly widely beloved by everybody. But without that, without having that to come first, and without that being kind of the shoulder of the somewhat gimpy giant that Jeff Johns stood on, we wouldn't have gotten everything that came after it, because he had to come back and really be changed by everything and kind of realize that being a hero isn't a matter of being born without fear. It's a matter of being able to overcome that fear to reach greater heights. It's, in a way, it kind of ties in also with what was always acknowledged as being special about Kyle Rayner, and that's the fact that up until a certain point, he wasn't exactly as susceptible to parallax because, as it was put, fear couldn't sneak up on him because he recognized it. He knew fear, and so he could kind of always, to put it one way, kind of see it coming. So he could sort of always avoid it. But as the Jeff Johns run kind of proceeded after Rebirth, Kyle he was faced time and again with the consequences of his actions. It wasn't just he's brought back and now everything's okay, it's all hunky-dory. No, he's actually got to deal with a lot. He's got to deal with a lot of people who resent the hell out of everything that happened immediately prior to his death and who haven't exactly let him completely off the hook. In particular, the rest of the Green Lantern Corps.
Well, he spends a lot of time following those actions. Sinestro specifically, just looking at that as kind of his triumph, because now Hal Jordan is going through everything that he went through. He's reviled by the rest of the Corps. He's the pariah. Everybody hates him. People want to kill him. So now he's brought him to his level. He's going through what he had gone.
Mm-hmm. The nice bonus to all of that was, though, that Hal did get to punch Batman in the face.
Oh, God, I love that. You know what? I love Batman as much as anybody, but I absolutely adore that panel when Batman goes to Batman.
You know what makes the panel? And God bless Ethan Van Sciver for this, but what makes the panel is in the background the look of sheer joy on Guy Gardner's face.
Oh, God, yeah, let's touch on Guy briefly. God, I love Guy. Once upon a time, I didn't like him quite so much just because he was such an obnoxious asshole. But, if you really compare particularly the four Earth Green Lanterns, you've got Hal, who is obviously a complex but very well fleshed out, very, very human hero. You've got John Stewart, and I've never really understood the appeal behind John. Seriously, I never, ever have.
I'm going to steal a rattlegism, because black people.
He's goddamn boring. There's just, he is so, pardon the expression here, and by all means, fire away at me for this one at will. He's so vanilla personality. There's just nothing to him except that he's just a good soldier who does what he's told. He's everything that people ever complain about with Superman. You got Kyle Rayner, who's got, and yeah, Ben's probably going to come out swinging with this one. But when it comes to Kyle, he's a whiny emo git, and yes, I know his girlfriend got stuffed into a refrigerator like meatloaf that somebody plans on having for lunch the next day. But he's just so damn irritating.
Who actually did that? Wasn't it? I could look it up, but do either of you know off the top of your head? Major Force.
I'm sorry?
I just wanted to know who actually did that to Kyle's girlfriend. Gavin reminded me.
Yeah, it's Major Force.
Yeah.
But I think when you talk about Kyle being the whiny emo kid, I had the opportunity to talk at last year's Tri-Con in Huntington, West Virginia, to Daryl Banks, who co-created Kyle Rayner, and got to talk to him a little bit about where Kyle has gone since he was originally created. And the idea of Kyle was to have something more relatable to the average comic book reader, and not a test pilot, not someone who was necessarily all that brave. They wanted to create someone that was a little more connected to what was going on in society at the time. And I think that the era in which he was created, I think that goes a long way towards determining what you see as far as his personality.
Oh, well, then may I just say, just a bit outside. No.
Well,
because the more relatable one, in my opinion, is actually arguably Guy Gardner.
See, I agree, but here's my counterpoint to that, and I'll step back then and let you rant on Kyle and Guy both, because I enjoy both characters. But you have to understand, we are a little bit older. We are a little bit beyond the average age for the comic book connoisseurs. And even at the time that Kyle Rayner was introduced, I was a little bit past probably their target demographic. They were aiming a few years younger than me. And if you look at the time frame that Kyle Rayner was introduced, it was right around when that grungy, Nirvana, emo-ish type music was starting to dominate the landscape. And you had bands like the Cranberries, and you had Johnny Depp coming to prominence with his very pale, pasty mascara, very dour-looking self. And it sort of became a reflection of what was popular in culture. Now, you rewind it. If Kyle Rayner's created 10 years earlier, he's probably going to look a lot and act a lot like Marty McFly. You fast forward 10 years beyond that, he's probably going to look and act a lot like James Vanderbeek. And
oh,
I think
God, that's worse.
I think it just ended up being a reflection of what was going on for their target demographic at that time. And I think they've done a good job over the last year or two trying to evolve him past that. I don't think he'll ever escape it, but I think over the last year or two he's become something a little bit more. But that's sort of my take on Kyle's creation and why we ended up with the whiny emo kid.
True, but the reason I think Guy is a little more understandable is because he is kind of at all times with the ring the way I think almost any of us would be when we would first get our hands on it, and that is totally just giddy and mischievous with the power that's now something not so much in but on our very hand. He is that ever-present bit of id that sort of takes hold with it, and it makes him fun in that it at least gives him a personality. And I'll even say the same for Kyle, at least a little bit of a personality to gravitate to. Jon Stewart, on the other hand, I don't hate him, but I don't really understand why he's the one that gets shoehorned into all the animated Justice League stuff. Why he's the one that gets talked about. What'd you say?
Do I have to say it again?
No, you don't have to
Jon
say it again.
Stewart because black people.
Yeah.
I'm stealing Mark Rattle's line as far as that goes.
It's also why we get Hawk of Hawkman.
Yeah, that's true. Although really I don't mind Hawk, especially because they really did her right with Justice. They really actually did her right.
Yeah, I'm not complaining there, but it's the same scenario.
But you know what? As much as I love Phil Lamar, that's a personality that I really find more engaging when it comes to Samurai Jack, as opposed to somebody who is wearing the most powerful weapon in the universe.
Potentially.
It's just that's all there is to it. Just if you're going to instill a reaction in me, at least instill immense dislike, so that as I'm reading the book, I can maybe, if I dislike you enough, take a certain perverse pleasure and misfortune befalling you. Kind of like,
Yay!
What is it?
Schadenfreude type of scenario.
Yeah, kind of like how it's an extra special joy that I take anytime Superboy Prime gets his ass kicked.
Everyone enjoys that.
Oh, God. But I just have no reaction to John. Just nothing. He's there. He is to me what Aquaman is to people who just grew up on the Super Friends.
He's just kind of there, huh?
You'd
be sorry if you were doing that over here in the water?
What'd you say?
You'd be sorry if you were doing that over here in the water instead of on dry land?
Or you know what? Or actually Apache Chief might be a better comparison. Or if we're to really bring things full circle, the disgraceful way that Green Lantern was portrayed in the fucking Super Friends. The man has the natural power of flight, and yet we're making him zip around constantly in a big green construct jet.
But he loved
airplanes. And by the way, for those of you who did grow up with the Super Friends and maybe you're not as familiar with the comics, if you would ever come at me with that Aquaman is a lame superhero shit, I swear I will fight you on the spot.
Them fighting words, huh?
Because for one thing, that is the most irritating motherfucker to fight on Injustice.
You're not kidding.
The spanny little sumbitch will mess you up. But also, I don't get where the Super Friends where the people who created that show came to that conclusion. You're talking about the king of the fucking lost kingdom of Atlantis, who has strength at his with Superman, Poseidon's trident has practically impenetrable skin. Oh, and lest we forget, it's not just that he can talk to fishes, it's that he's a fucking waterbender.
You know, the sum total of my thoughts on whether or not Aquaman is awesome or not can be summed up in the picture, and it's on the internet. I don't have access to it at the moment. He's very slowly being lifted out of the water by Cthulhu, and he goes, oh, so talking to fish is a weak power, huh? Exactly. And, God, as I think about all this, I'm all of a sudden now being reminded of all the injustices that have been done to great comic characters, and I'm just thinking about the fact, and I'm just thinking about the fact that we also now have another Fantastic Four movie to look forward to. Let's not. I've seen the cast of that. I've seen the actors they've cast. If you wanted a cast full of hipster douchebags, you've succeeded. Congratulations. If you're trying to cast the Fantastic Four or Dr. fucking Doom, you have failed miserably. And thank you to Benjamin J. Cologne for the picture, because that is the one I was referencing.
What happened to the days when it was okay for heroes and villains to just be larger-than-life figures?
I don't know. I really don't, but that's where we are. All right, we got about 18 minutes of live time left. So, Gavin, is there anything else you wanted to talk about, anyone we haven't hit on?
I'll just throw some quick hits out there, and if you want to expound on any of them, feel free. If not, my feelings won't be hurt. I love Eric Chris of Hector Hammond under Jeff Johns' reign. Didn't like the movie treatment he got, but the inherent creepiness of him in the comic books, where he got into Hal Jordan's mind and relived sex with Carol Ferris through Hal Jordan's mind. They turned Hector Hammond from being a joke into being this very grotesque, very creepy character that I loved dearly. I love the absurdity of the shark, just pure nonsense, and I love it. My personal favorite Green Lantern villain is Cyborg Superman, and how they have turned him into this very tragic character that just wants to die, and he's not allowed to.
Henshaw. How did I forget that?
Yeah, the Manhunters brought him back after he had been obliterated, and to me that was just it was one of those rare moments where a comic book that is a mainstream spandex and cape comic book actually managed to bridge the gap into having an emotionally touching moment where you see the one tear rolling out of his eye when he's being brought back to life by the Manhunters.
Oh, God, yeah.
And I think maybe the underutilized villain, he got a little bit of play towards the end of Jeff Johns' run and early in Venditti's run, but somebody that I'd like to see more done with is the Quardian Weapon. And that's my quick hits. But he was introduced as sort of a standalone character that can still make weapons that are accessible to whoever's willing to be the highest bidder, that are highly effective in any situation. And they made him into a decent character on his own, and I'd like to see him pop back up at some point. But there's still a ton of great villains out there that I'm sure that no matter how long we overrun, there's not going to be time to discuss, from Bofunga the Unrelenting to Hunger Dog to whoever else we can come up with. But yeah, I'll gladly tag along for whoever you guys want to dig deeper into.
All right, Sean, you got some quick hits for us?
God, I can't believe that I actually forgot to mention Hector Hammond. I am right there with you on that one, because for those of you who are unaware, Hector in his earliest appearances was, one of the best comparisons I can make is almost sort of a Vandal Savage or Ra's al Ghul type, who is pretty much very nearly, damn near immortal, super intelligence. His intellect and his entire brain, his entire physical brain, is actually enhanced by. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Gavin. I believe it was a comet or asteroid or something.
Meteor.
Yeah, meteor. something astrological.
Yeah, and in the very early days, not much was done with. But what ends up getting fleshed out with him is that he has the ability, despite the fact that his head is swollen to the size that he is actually physically completely incapacitated, and the fact that he's lost his gift of speech, it is swollen to the point that even beneath solid concrete and restrained to a chair in Belle Reve, Louisiana, he is able to completely erase the mind, literally, pretty much almost all brain functions, all memories, all thought altogether from the guards above him. That there is more or less just about no limit whatsoever to what his mind can do. And it's terrifying because how do you stop that? How do you hide from that? How do you get past it if you are not a betahute? I will definitely give you that with wishing that we could see the arms dealers of that are the weaponers of Quard having more done with them, because they were Sinestro's kind of silly-looking default minions in the very earliest Silver Age books, but they've just kind of been forgotten about. And last but not least, the one more that I'm going to throw out there because we really didn't pay him nearly enough attention. For those of you out there whose only experience with Green Lantern was the movie, and you're only familiar with the name Parallax from that, go read the books. He is the stuff of fucking nightmare.
Well, he's the embodiment of all fear.
Well, yeah, quite literally.
Literally.
I mean, if you can feel even a moment of at any point, he can get inside your head, burrow there, stay there, and turn you in to something absolute monster, something that's beyond human comprehension. As I said, he gets to Hal Jordan after Mongol destroys Coast City. He gets to Kyle Rayner after, and let this just be an example of just how dark the Sinestro Core War story gets, after a sentient alien virus that has been enlisted into the Corps willfully invades Kyle's mother's body and wastes her away. That is how he manages to get to the one Green Lantern that actually really knows. And also, it's worth it just to see the way Ethan Von Siever, in particular, draws anybody who is possessed by him. Have fresh pants on hand, because I'll tell you, those two, Ethan in particular, and Manuel Pacheco, when Jeff writes something particularly terrible, they can bring it to the grimmest life possible. Gavin, you might actually know the panel that I'm thinking about here. The one where Black Hand gets away from the hospital, and it's just him facing the foreground, and behind him is just littered, rotting, emaciated corpses in the hallway.
Yeah. Jeff had this way with villains of coming up with just the worst possible versions of them, just the most despicable, unsettling, creepy versions of everything these villains could be. Like we said with Mr. Hammond, he did it with him. He did it with Black Hand. He took these characters that were very much throwaways and kind of jokes and made them very disturbing threats.
And you know, I'm sure that you experienced a pretty holy shit moment yourself in that very first panel in No Fear when you saw the shark pop out of the water.
Yes.
Holy hell. He does some absolutely incredible splash pages.
Yeah.
It's the funniest thing. I can't name you many writers or artists that I've experienced so far who I could say they're worth reading just for their splash pages. God damn, Ethan Van Siever is absolutely one. And I apologize, Ben in particular, if I'm mispronouncing his name. Stuff like the first moment when Hal emerges from his coffin and just says, "Get the hell away from this, Sinestro." Or he did a great job. And if I remember correctly in reading an interview with Jeff Johns, it was Ethan's idea to make different guys' rings operate differently artistically. You know, Hal's was this very precise. It did exactly what he wanted to do. Kyle's an artist. The projections. He gets them just perfect. John is an architect. Everything worked the way it was supposed to. Kilowog's was very, and Guy Gardner's very messy with sparks flying everywhere and just turning it loose. I like the description of Kilowog's in particular. His is the only ring that makes a sound.
and that all came, which I think speaks to his creativity as an artist. Guys, I'm running desperately low on battery power, so I will catch the rest of this on once it comes up. Before I sign off, I'm just going to throw out there real quick a classic Green Lantern villain that I don't know if it's been touched on unless I missed it early on, but Solomon Grundy need pants too.
We have not yet touched on Solomon Grundy, but he can get it. Okay, I'll let you go, Gavin. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me hang around, guys. Look forward to hearing the rest of this when it goes up on the site.
All right.
See you guys.
Gavin. All right. Brief thanks to Gavin from thecasualheroes.com for stopping by and talking Green Lantern for as long as he could. Again, casualheroes.com is where is his website. He is one of the, I don't know if he's one of the founding members. He's all over that. He's also has a weekly, semi-weekly podcast with Pat Mullen called The Championship Rounds, where they talk boxing. And he's all over the WrestleCasts that are associated with the Casual Heroes. So thanks to Gavin for stopping by, and I think that took care of most of his plugs. All right, he mentioned Solomon Grundy, the poor zombified man who was originally a foe for Green Lantern simply because he'd been in the swamp so long he was mostly wood.
Oh, Grundy. He's, he's one of those that kind of, I don't know if you want to say kind of appropriately, or maybe perhaps unfortunately, never seems to get much of a main role. And that's despite the fact that at least one time that I can remember, and maybe it's only one time, there was a point when there was actually an attempt to give him a little bit of a depth. And those of you who have ever seen Justice League Unlimited, you know what I'm talking about. The episode in which several leaguers are after some kind of super powerful weapon or something or other, and Grundy is along to help them find it. And apparently the whole idea of it is that whatever they're looking for can grant the utmost heart's desire of whoever finds it. And Grundy at one point confides in Hawkgirl, of all people, that what he really wants back most is his soul. He just kind of wants his soul to be at rest. And it's one of the rare times when you really stop and think about the fact that for as many times as he's been killed and brought back, if you're the type of spiritual person who believes in the existence of a soul, what must that do to somebody to just kind of never be in repose that way? To know that you're doomed to kind of always be so close to that moment of death, that moment of release that every other human experiences, but that every time you have it seemingly within your grasp, it's going to be pulled away from you.
That's one of those, that's one of those crazy things that when you think about it, when it's handled properly, really gives you some moments of pause and reflection. All right, so I think that's pretty much all of them that we are going to have time for this time. I might have to have another one of these and hit the guys that we haven't talked about yet, assuming there's any that come to your mind right away, Sean.
No, you know what? I think we actually hit just about everybody, unless we really started reaching to some minor villains like fucking Sonar.
The Tattooed Man in all of his various iterations.
Oh, yeah, the Tattooed Man.
Quality villain right there.
He is a man with tattoos.
All right. Okay, I think that's everything then. Trying to remember if there was anything else I wanted to make sure and hit. And we've hit everything that my research was able to come across. So, Sean, what do you got to plug coming up?
The main thing that I got to plug coming up, that would be, two of them actually. First and foremost, to plug my own stuff, this coming Tuesday, myself and Mr. Winfree here are going to be back on Long Road to Ruin as we begin our two-part look at Lionsgate's famously successful Saw franchise. We're going to start with the first three movies, the Amanda trilogy, and then in the next one, we're going to slog our way through the mixed results of everything that came after that.
Slog is the appropriate term.
Oh, yes. Oh, God, yes, it is. And that's going to be the start of actually Robert's 3-month tenure curating the show while Mark is away getting his soon-to-be-arriving new baby boy Jonas settled in. And after Saw, we're going to be taking the merry month of May to take a look at the Fast and Furious movies and their curious rise, fall, and then startling ascension. June, we're going to be looking, and again, 2 parts, at the Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Actually, it's not just going to be us. It is going to be us, and we are going to be joined by Long Road to Ruin title card Artemis. Title card Artemis. What the smurf fuck is an Artemis?
Oh, I'm assuming it's a cross between the Greek goddess and some bizarre worship ceremony. I don't know. But what he's trying to say, well, what Sean is trying to get to is Benjamin J. Colon, the talented artist who does the title card for the Long Road to Ruin at the time and inclination, is going to be joining us discussing the Nightmare on Elm Street trilogy. He was on here for our first part talking about Spider-Man villains, and I look forward to having him for that.
Ben make good with the Artemis thing.
And, all right, anything else there, Sean?
And the only other thing I am going to throw out there is a friendly little plug for a friend of mine. Please to be dodging over to that guy with the glasses. My friend and colleague, somewhat colleague, and we both perform web shows, although hers is much better. Alison Pregler, Obscurus Lupa, just recently posted the 4th episode in what I believe, if I recall what she told me, is to be an 8-part finale to her look at Charmed. So it's been a great run up to this point, so by all means, go over and get caught up on her episodes devoted to the previous 7. They are, all of them, absolutely every one of them, hysterical. And, oh yeah, of course, as I'm so fond of pointing out, don't be a dick, support hardworking web show hosts, and please turn off ad block before you press play. She's making a living making these videos, and I think in exchange, you all should really be okay with enduring a grand total of about 2.5 minutes of ads for Verizon and Disney World or whatever else Blip is running this month. And yeah, otherwise, also go and like the Long Road to Ruin Facebook page. We just hit 100 likes recently. We've hit the century mark. 100 people have liked us at some point. So get over there. Get active when I post things that I do about 2 or 3 times per day. Talk to us. Let us know what you think of the show. Let us know if there's a franchise you want to hear about, or if you agree with us, disagree, politely dissent, what the hell ever. And yeah, that's it. I am Artemis.
Alrighty. As for my plugs, I believe officially now I have lost the semifinals in the 411 MMA Factor Fiction tournament this time around. Cody, I'm going to butcher his last name, so I apologize. Cody Lemmel, I'm pretty sure I'm saying that wrong, but I believe he beat me, and he's got a good chance to take the whole thing because he does the Reddit. I don't know. I've never used the website, so I can't. But so he beat me, I'm pretty sure, unless there was some late surge. And congratulations to him. Good luck to him and whoever takes him on in the finals. I had a good run, and so thank you to everyone who supported me there. Locked in the Guillotine is live right now in the MMA zone of 411mania.com. I talk news, GSP's injury, which apparently he sustained when Captain America no-sold, which is kind of appropriate considering the character. But so GSP's injured. I talk a little about that. Renan Barão stepping up to be in the main event of UFC 173, and I air some of my grievances with the UFC's monotonous, repetitive promotional efforts. So, if you're interested in any of that, by all means head over there. I will be hosting the 411 Ground and Pound radio show now that Mark has stepped aside from that. I will be trying to do justice to the great legacy that he left behind, and we're previewing UFC Fight Night 39, I believe. It's Antonio Minotauro Nogueira taking on Big Country Roy Nelson. So look forward to myself and Pat Mullen making jokes about heavyweight. It's always a good time. All right, next week, also as Sean mentioned, I will be, for the next couple of months, hosting The Long Road to Ruin, and we're tackling the Saw franchise, which is not as violent in the beginning as you think, folks. And I will make my case for that this Tuesday. I'm not going to defend some of the later entries. In fact, I will rant. It's within my power to do so, and I probably will. Now, as far as this show goes next week, There are two options on the table, one of which is, and it's up in the air at this particular point in time. Either, two choices here. Most likely I'm going to see if I can get Pat Mullen on, and we're going to talk about Thor, because I'm still in comic book land, and I'll move back to Marvel. And Pat's a huge Thor fan, so that'll be fun. However, if there's a big professional wrestling event this Sunday, apparently. Kind of snuck up on me. WrestleMania. Now, the storyline going into the main event, which is guaranteed to include two of my least favorite people on the planet Earth in the forms of Randy Orton and Dave Bautista. They're going to be contesting for the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. Now, since no one wants to see that particular match, and I mean no one, if that closed the show by itself, people would leave, and I wouldn't blame them. But adding the wrinkle to that particular match is going to be the winner of an earlier in the card, a match between Triple H and Daniel Bryan. Now, here's the thing. If Triple H walks out of WrestleMania 30 in possession of the belts and title of WWE World Heavyweight Champion, I will break from comic book villains, and the Barbarian himself will get his own podcast, and I will probably make it a call-in show just so everyone can bitch about him. So those are your options. And this Sunday, we will have this Sunday, after WrestleMania, I will have the particulars. I'll know which way I'm going. But those are the two options right now. And one of those is going to happen. So that's where that stands for this. And that's the end of my plugs. So, for Sean Comer, coming from the Fortress of Shaunitude, and I will see him on Tuesday. I am Robert Winfree, reminding you that without bad guys, good guys are just guys in tights with capes. I'll see you here next week, everybody.
So say good night to the bad guys.